War. War never changes. On October 23rd, 2077, America and China threw their atomic arsenal at each other. Other countries around the world saw this as an opportunity to attack other enemies too. With America and China at each other's necks, Europe turned on itself. Half of them went after the United Kingdom. With the UK's eventual and inevitable independency from Europe started it all, and their government attempted to stay neutral, and yet they secretly made and even purchased weapons from other countries. Some decisions were getting worse every day, as people would leave and enter the United Kingdom with vital information that tipped the tide of the resource wars. The government announced the launch of a company called HM Survival Corp, which was made to create shelters from potential nuclear threats. This was good, but it got very bad very quickly, when the public realised that this was only going to be for the governments and the members of the royal family. Some people with high influence could make it in, potentially, but most, if not all, of the public was left outside. The worst thing about it is that there were only 7 of these shelters made, and they were dotted all across the United Kingdom. So if the bombs did drop, and they did, nobody would have any clue where they were, and if they did, they would not get in. People had to dig. The United Kingdom fell apart even further, with some being incredibly selfish and wanting war, with others praying for peace. In the year 2069, the UK was officially renamed to the Britannia Isles, uniting Wales, Scotland, England, and Ireland into one big country. They conceded the whole peace thing when the United Kingdom, now Britannia Isles, launched their Mark IV power armour in response to America's T-45 power armour. Weapons tech also increased. The day of the bombs, October 23rd, 2077, South East England, most of Scotland, and all of Wales was destroyed. Ireland turned into a collection of cracked islands covered in radioactive mist. The only thing that lives there now are ghouls. Feral or not, it doesn't matter. Nothing and no one gets in or out of that place. Nobody knew or really cared if any of the royals or any politicians made it to the shelters, knowing their selfish ways. Not everybody was able to make it to safety either when the bombs dropped, but to those who did, they were happy. When they stepped outside, their smiles were gone. The world had ended. Britannia's governments did nothing to protect their people. December 31st, 2299. This story begins. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Fallout Britannia. This is a story that I have been writing for a very, very long time, and only recently I have perfected it. Now, just before we continue, this is set in the Fallout universe, so anything I say against politics or any royals, it's not a serious thing. It's just, again, its own little story that just sets in the United Kingdom in the Fallout universe, and it's something I've wanted to do for a very long time. With the whole role-playing aspect in the Fallout universe, well, that you can get through the Fallout games at least, it has been a dream to try and make my own mod for Fallout 4, where you could get your own world area and it's all set in the UK, but I thought that was going to be way too much for especially one person. So I rolled it back and just wrote the story instead. Now, this story is 14 pages long. What you just heard was the prologue, and that is page 1. So like I said, this is in the Fallout universe, and it is set in the United Kingdom. This is... the best comparison I can make for this story is if you look to the Fallout's Redemption story series on Fudge Muppet's channel. That was some more inspiration for me to be able to make this story, and I'm really glad I went ahead with this, because now that it's finished, I can look back at this and really smile because it's so good. There are no drawings or any art details of anything to really speak of. I haven't been able to do art ever since I left college over 3 years ago, and sadly I haven't really been able to pick up since. I haven't been able to find the necessary tools to make the best art possible, even if I were to do things digitally or by hand. With what I want to picture, I just can't do it. Or not at least in time where I want to be able to release this onto YouTube. So this may get re-released again one day, where it has art in the background of the video rather than just a blank screen. But for now, this is going to be like an audiobook. Now that could be a problem because I don't have the best voice. Whenever I try to go deep, it kind of goes like this, and it's not really pleasant to listen to. I can't really go too high either because my voice once again becomes a bit intolerable. So whilst I want to be able to get this story out there, it might not be the best thing if people don't want to listen to it, and I don't blame you at all. One thing I will do is I will put all of the text in the description of the video, so you know what was basically said. If you don't want to listen to it, or if you just want to read it yourself, it will all be there. So that is everything I have to say on this series. I hope you are looking forward to this. I will see you all in the Britannia wasteland. James and Ferb lay outside of the wall of Hub 42, under the stars and waiting for the hub to celebrate the new year in spectacular fashion. A new year, new decade, new century. With these people, this would be really unique. Hub 42 was formerly a huge trading hub built on one of the shelters made by HM Survival Corp. But in time, it was transformed into something different by a group of people with great scientific applications. The transformation was made by two people who had all of their technology put together and a few extra somethings that fell from the sky. And sadly, they became alien worshippers. They believe that aliens exist, and they try to make things to make contact with other life. They were getting nowhere, as the strange alien tech they possess was put towards weaponry. They have chunky alien-made firearms, and they claim to have a satellite from outer space. You would have to see it to believe it. James wondered on a daily basis if he could ever leave this pointless cult and explore what was left of the world. Hub 42 was a big area, but everyone was completely nuts. People fell for this alien stuff as well, and were trapped here as consequence. That's how Hub 42 managed to expand. James was one of the few who was allowed to leave for supply runs, but required the Galaxy Mother's blessing to do so. If he ever failed to return by dark, or not at all, then he would be refused future entry. James was trusted amongst the hubologists, and he was always on time. He was trusted by nearby settlements too. He would arrive to trade items and fix any technologies. Since James's settlement was based around alien tech, it was basically a given for him to study it. James kept things happy between settlements and Hub 42, or at least as happy as he could make it. James and Ferb made their way back inside of Hub 42 as it was getting dark. As they got to the entrance, a woman ran up behind them, calling for help. The guards aimed their weapons as she halted. James and Ferb stopped at the door and turned around. The woman said the raiders from King's Chase were attacking the settlement in full force. The woman was one of many who did not know about the raider attack. However, there was a group of that settlement who did know and let the raiders in. The woman begged for help, or at least to let the survivors into Hub 42. The guards explained how they just couldn't let anybody into Hub 42 or let anybody out, and how the Galaxy Mother wouldn't just take in new outsiders. The woman screamed in frustration, which caused the other people in the distance to run over. These were the remaining settlers who survived the attack. The guards once again took aim and nearly shot them, but their hesitance paid off. The Galaxy Mother came to the entrance with her two personal guards, demanding to know what was going on. But before anyone could explain, another group of people were charging towards Hub 42, from the same place the survivors were. The Galaxy Mother almost denied the entry of the survivors, but Ferb argued with her. If anybody could swear in an argument, it was Ferb. They were mother and son. As the survivors stumbled in, slowly but surely, guards marched outside with their blasters ready. The settlers had never seen anything like this. They were a form of laser-assisted energy weapons, with batteries as the magazines. These battery magazines could hold between 20 and 45 charges, and required up to 9 hours to fully recharge. They were activated and hummed quietly. They glowed in bright colours, and all of that accelerated when they fired upon the raiders. A glorious light show was on display, and was somewhat fitting for the New Year's celebration. Well, visually, that is. Time went by, and everything settled. The clocks ticked over to the new year. Instead of celebration, there was commotion. The raiders were stripped of their gear, and the survivors were allowed inside. One of these raiders was wearing a piece of armor with Hell written on the back in bold red text. These were not raiders. This was a detachment of the demonic army. They originate in a city called Hell, but came from a nearby settlement called King's Chase. The guards looked to the Galaxy Mother, who in turn looked at James and Ferb. Hell can be many things, but here in the Britannia wasteland, after the world has ended, it became home to one of the best metal factories ever. It was difficult to get used to because of the environment, but it worked. It became a great place for trade, and its vast inventory was always under attack. Loads of people wanted to be a part of it. Some just wanted to see it. Others got greedy and wanted all of it to themselves. Hell was ruled by an individual called Lucius and his wife Victoria. Every day they are constantly bugged by their biggest enemy, the Britannia Remnants, as they demand the metalworks to be handed over to the Remnants for their own selfish gain. It was called Hell for a few reasons. Its army has an overwhelming, terrifying presence. The dark chop-shop feel of the factory floor and the cruelty of its ruler. Lucius oversees everything, all the production, and the army that lives there. Whilst Lucius runs the army himself, his second in command is Mason, nicknamed Dodger. He earned that nickname by avoiding all contact with hand-to-hand combat. He was a master of it. Including Lucius and Mason, there were 173 people in this demonic army. They were all trained to kill, and they were bloody good at it. Despite the fear factor that Hell has on the Britannia wasteland, trade is very good there, due to the great metal products that can be produced. Weapons, armor, power armor, railway tracks, electronic parts, wiring, lighting, so much more. They would often trade with faraway settlements, but the settlements tend to get worse off deals than they would have liked. If they denied a deal of any kind, that was their loss. But if any settlement ever tried to be smart during a trade, the demonic army would pay them a visit. The settlement would be raided, any metal would be taken and used for production, though these scenarios were rare. Lucius was in his office, looking at documents on a terminal. He saved the files and made his way to the west window of his office. The office was a floating pod on top of hundreds of stairs. This would allow him to look down on the workshop, like he was viewing his empire. The window to the east of the pod oversaw the training camp for his demonic army. All of this under one roof. As he was walking over to the east window, he checked on his men, and a young woman ran up the stairs with a note in her hand. As she was reaching the top, she was panting slightly. Lucius had 2 guards outside of his office, and one of them halted her. He put his hand out to stop the woman, and in turn noticed the note. The woman handed her the note, and was dismissed. The note was handed to Lucius, and he read it. He learned of the attack on the settlement up north, and the attack on Hub 42. But Lucius learned that they went against their orders, and this detachment charged Hub 42 by themselves. Lucius scrunched up the note and threw it to one of the windows and raced down the stairs. He paced through the camp, every soldier standing to attention. Lucius marched into the specialist tent and all went quiet. Seconds later, machinery hummed to life, mechanical parts moving, and the shadows of arms could be seen through the tent. Lucius had a very special suit of power armor, more advanced than any other suit in the Britannia wasteland, even more powerful than any of the Britannia remnants possess. Lucius then stepped out of the tent. His power armor really was unique. The torso was chiseled with incredible muscle detail. The arms and legs were heavily plated, but still had muscle detail carved into the plating. The shoulder pauldrons were giant tusks, going down the back and acted as a protective cover for the fusion core. The helmet was inspired by Lovecraft, with large eye slots and tentacle-looking facial hair across the cheeks, lips, and chin. In case you didn't get it, this power armor was post-war. His go-to weapon was the L99 Master Support Weapon, a bullpup weapon featuring a 50-round drum magazine with explosive tip 5.56 ammunition, personalized with a reflex sight stretching the entire length of the weapon itself, a foregrip, a black and grey camouflage design across the weapon, and a magnet in the stock of the weapon so it can be magnetically attached to the power armor. Lucius called for Mason. In turn, he called for 20 men. The demonic army was ready for war. Bristol's Cabot Circus had a shelter made by the government for the government, underneath the shopping centre. When it was known that HM Survival Corps built it for the officials and royals and anyone who was allowed in, it was overrun by dozens of people very quickly. They piled in like salmon in a can, but they all survived the blast. After resurfacing, the most charismatic took leadership and rebuilt Cabot Circus into Cabot Kingdom. The favourite was elected leader, and in turn, royalty, and the new tradition saw themselves be renamed to Cabot. Every leader after them took the mantle of king or queen and was always renamed to Cabot. That way everyone would know who was in charge. Those on the throne liked the royalty, but they did not like the name. However, they went with it. This was home to the Britannia remnants, arch enemy to Lucius and his demonic army. A few hours' walk away was a place formerly named King's Chase. The name stuck, as it was the disgusting home for the outcasts of Cabot Kingdom. Didn't like how things were in Cabot Kingdom? Then you stay here. For good. As in you are escorted here, in chains, blindfolded, escorted by 4 armoured remnant soldiers. The Cabot Kingdom guards keep names and faces in documents. King's Chase doesn't see much trade, and any people who are stuck there try to take caravans due to the isolation and the lack of resources there. It isn't safe either, as ill and mutated people live among them. The Britannia remnants are made up of soldiers, politicians, and royals after the bombs. The soldiers who served to protect everyone were limited by the government, who stayed in pursuit of resources for their own selfish deeds. These people wanted everything that was left, as if it had their names on it. Not everyone was like this, nor did anybody ever agree to it. Those sorts of people and the outcasts make up the other half of the remnants, who abandoned the all-for-us way of thinking before the bombs. They turned away from their selfish nature, and helped others for nothing to make up for their past. They did simple work, protect caravans, guard settlements. Some wanted to do nothing, and others did anything they could to make amends to the people they failed to protect. The remnants like to keep anything and everything that still works, including suits of Mark IV power armor. This was mass-produced and was designed for police and SWAT. It was painted black, with police tagged on the front and back of the torso. There was an upgraded variant, the Mark VII, that was also mass-produced, but it was for the military. coated in green with mild camouflage patterns all over the suit. On the left side of the breastplate was the Britannia Army logo, and on the right side was the rank of the wearer. The Mark IV was in response to America's T-45 suit. The Mark VII was in response to America's T-51 suit. The Britannia remnants tend to keep away from others unless they saw something they liked. From working firearms to rubber duckies, to toasters to televisions, to pieces of metal plating. They felt entitled, and they didn't care. They send out multiple patrols every day to any nearby settlement, but never sent teams to stay at the settlements. Even if they wanted to, they would always get kicked out. Whilst the protection was good, the nature of their kind was unwelcome. It never ends well for both settlements either way, and the soldiers in particular, but that's the standard arrangement nowadays. One day a recon team of 8 men returned to Cabot Kingdom and had news for Queen Cabot III. She sat on an oversized throne, in a back area, nice and safe, away from all the other people. The patrol leader gave the following report. 12 ghouls were slain, rations were purchased from a settlement called Multiberry. A settlement with great farmland and produced a lot of food. A nearby pharmacy was looted of any remaining medicines, and they saw men wearing the demonic army uniform, but they did not engage. Whilst the remnants saw the demonic army did not see them. This was smart. This brought up concerns amongst the council, as Hell's demonic army was the only faction that could match Cabot Kingdom and the remnants. Field Marshal Bradford consulted Queen Cabot III after the situation, but he was ordered to not get involved. Bradford was a wise man. She trusted Queen Cabot III, but didn't always obey her. He knew that if the remnants didn't act soon, they would be on the losing end of a devastating battle. They do have a secret weapon, but the remnants have nukes. In the year 2050, the Supernatural Museum of Superpowers was opened, and was possibly the biggest snake oil pitch in Britannia history. People tried to stay there for a night before moving on the next day, as a stupid, trendy challenge sort of thing, and everyone who does has a different story about the place. After the bombs in the year 2139, settlers moved in at one point after being attracted to the museum, and unimaginatively, a cult was formed. Time went on, and because of the supernatural nature of the building, they were either killed or exiled, and all of them claimed it was all part of the cult. It was only their own fault. Over the years, people have come and gone in attempts to scavenge for anything useful. The only people that are now settled in the building are a family of 3 ghouls. The parents are feral, but their child was a glowing one, who was able to keep the parents tamed by the powers of a glowing one. The child was a girl, and she didn't have a kind upbringing. Her parents wanted her to be the best she could, and they pressed hard and caused friction in the family. The parents were so strict they wouldn't ever tell the girl what her name was, so she called herself Candy. When the bombs dropped, she made it official by writing Candy in big letters on some of the walls around the museum. She would go to the gift shop and grab some pencils and draw on the walls, silly things like houses and flowers, just to keep herself entertained. Candy's parents, being feral ghouls, were very shaky, and they stayed very close to their daughter. Candy was conflicted about her new environment. She had a big museum as her new home. It felt like a mansion. That was pretty cool. She felt even cooler with her new supernatural powers. She even had 2 crazy feral ghouls that could protect her at all times. However, these 2 crazy feral ghouls treated her like shit in her past life, and now she's got to look after them. They keep making these weird noises all the time, through the day, through the night, and they yell at some of the exhibits over and over again, and they scare off any travellers that come nearby, disallowing Candy's ability to talk to anyone else, making her very lonely. Candy tried to visit a nearby settlement multiple times with her parents in tow, but she couldn't go out of view of the museum without her parents going crazy. When she finally got near the settlement, they naturally opened fire because they were scared of the glowing one. Candy would race back to the museum, but she would always go unharmed. Her parents would act as shields, and remarkably, they would be bullet sponges. Days felt like decades, as she could only talk to her feral ghoul parents. What Candy never knew, and never will know, is her parents can communicate telepathically. They can reach out to passers-by and beg them to stay away for everyone's protection. This was a combination of gifts: supernatural powers enhanced by their mutation, and a new home. With Candy unable to overpower her parents, she may never enjoy her life. Days felt like decades. Nobody to talk to, nobody to play to, no life left. After the bombs, London was given many new names: New London, Central Waste, Big City, and many more. The alley that leads to the city entrance was covered in traps: bear traps, mines, guns connected to tripwires, grenade bouquets, and anything else. It was a long walk to get there, but it was a great place to spend the day. Food, drink, trade, you can wash, you can brawl, you can shag. Anything you want to do, you can do it. That was what was keeping this place going. It was also a place for diplomacy. The New London Law of 2179 declared that this place were to remain as it is in order to save one of Britannia's best landmarks. There was a selection of buildings that were all collapsed, but one of them in the centre was still intact. This building was called the Peace Building, and it was used almost every day, from petty trade deals to who gets to find who's stashed nukes. But today it would play host to a man in Minotaur power armor, and a woman in a thick red coat. On the morning of the 9th of January 2300, a squad of 20 men arrived. They were wearing demonic armor. They were in a diamond formation with Lucius and his wife Victoria in the center. They made their way to the base of the building, and a few made their way into the lobby. Lucius took his wife and 3 men upstairs to the top floor, and awaited the arrival of Queen Cabot III. That evening, 3 large land vehicles arrived carrying half of the Britannia remnants and Queen Cabot III herself. Once the convoy halted, most of the soldiers raced around with their weapons in hand, making a corridor for Queen Cabot III to walk down to the building entrance. She was joined by Field Marshal Bradford and 10 men, and they made their way to the top of the building to meet Lucius. The Britannia remnants entered, slowly but surely. Queen Cabot III made immediate eye contact with Victoria, as Lucius did to Bradford. The people in the meeting room were the only people who kept peace in the remains of the Britannia wasteland. Lucius knew before Queen Cabot arrived that he would be outnumbered, but also knew that the demonic army would have a more terrifying presence. In the room at the top of the building was a long oval table, a chair at each end and 6 along each side, 14 in total. Lucius refused to leave his power armor, so instead moved a chair and took its place, standing of course. Victoria and the 3 soldiers took their seats. Lucius was somewhat reasonable. He demanded work and demanded progress. If he heard something he didn't like, he would twist the story and then open fire. He wanted the Britannia remnants to keep out of the affairs of Hell's expansion across the Britannia wasteland. His ultimate goal is to have the everyday people of the Britannia wasteland to have the technology of the past, like railways and electronics, but also wanted them to work for him. Nobody was above Lucius, and he made sure of it. Queen Cabot III was not one for negotiations. She was like the pre-war Britannia government, selfish. She too wanted railways and electronics to become common again, but only for the use of the remnants. She didn't care for the wasteland, nor did she ever help anyone personally. The royal before her sent detachments of remnants to settlements to protect them, but it was more of a way of appearing less evil. All royals prior were all the same. That one royal was the only one who stood out, and Bradford was honoured to be alive at the same time he was. Bradford himself was a pacifist, avoided all confrontations whenever he could, and talked before he shot. He was a gem amongst the remnants, and he was the only person that people of the Britannia wasteland really liked. Queen Cabot III sat in the middle of the oval table, demanding that Lucius would be moved to sit opposite her. Lucius was standing in the middle of one side of the table. Queen Cabot sat in the middle of the other side. Field Marshal Bradford and 4 other soldiers took the remaining seats. The remaining remnants were ordered to wait outside. Nobody has ruined this custom yet, and it won't be ruined now. As the 6 left the room and closed the door behind them, 2 secretly stayed outside as guards, while the other 4 returned to the entrance. By the door, one of them grabbed a small microphone-looking device from his pocket and turned it on so they can listen to what was going on the other side of the door. The other slowly paced forward to the top of the staircase to prevent anybody else coming up. The remnants weren't going to let Lucius and his hell pigs get anything good from this negotiation. In fact, they wanted any excuse to try and kill him today. James and Ferb were caught up in the middle of the skirmish between the demonic army and Hub 42. The Hub kept away from others and had no reason to intervene with outside politics. As James and Ferb had a part to play in the skirmish, they were ordered to clean it up. James had a plan to pay for the deaths the demonic army suffered in that night with valuables from Hub 42. Who could resist alien tech, right? Ferb was worried for his life. The first place they went to was King's Chase. They were trying to barter with the weak old sods and becoming cannon fodder for potential battle. They were swayed by the shiny metal things that James and Ferb brought, but weren't dumb enough to realize that they would be killed using it. They trekked into Cabot Kingdom to stock up and ask if any remnants could help them in the event of any conflict. It would be risky since the remnants were arch enemies of Hell and Lucius personally, but they rarely, and I mean rarely, skipped the chance to kill some hell pigs and potentially Lucius himself. They climbed to the top of the kingdom to ask any high-ranking officer for aid, but were horrified to learn that they were too late. They were told Her Majesty Queen Cabot III went to New London over a day ago to sort out the very same problem. Did Lucius think that the remnants were at Hub 42 during the raid? Was there a spy amongst his ranks? Did the spy kill his men instead? Did Hub 42 secretly join the remnants and attack first? Lucius wasn't there, so he couldn't possibly know. He was reasonable, to a limit. He would listen first, but he would shoot after if he didn't like what he heard. James and Ferb were on a hell of a mission now. They had to stop an all-out war between Hell and the Britannia remnants. Ferb took out a notepad and began to write something. James was in front of him at the time, so he did know that he was writing something. James and Ferb travelled as quickly to New London as possible to see if they could prevent any kind of war between the 2 factions. They were close, but had to rest. It was 1 o'clock in the morning on the 9th of January, and James and Ferb took residence in a nearby settlement. They couldn't stay long. James was fast asleep. He was calm, and he had a plan. James could sell Hell to Lucius all over again, but Ferb was different. He was worried about the consequences of an inevitable conflict. They fought mutated monsters and bloodthirsty raiders on their way here. Would it be worth killing arguably the 2 most organized and biggest factions in the wasteland just for other monsters to come in and claim it for their own? They both have many flaws, but they only butted heads with each other. The time a patrol of the demonic army attacked Hub 42 was their own doing, not Lucius. Or was it? Did Lucius begin to expand? He does want an empire to spread across the Britannia wasteland, and this could be one of his best chances. It was 10 o'clock on the 9th of January. James and Ferb woke up to a cooked breakfast of beans and glowing meat. They looked past the settlement and saw Lucius with some of his demonic army at New London. That reminded him. A place that had a tower for peace shouldn't be guarded with so many traps. Doesn't that count to the point of the peace building? 11 o'clock now, and it was time to go. Nobody saw any Britannia remnants come by, so they still had a chance. By midday, James and Ferb made it to the entrance of the peace building and were immediately confronted by the demonic army. They pushed the 2 boys back from the entrance and demanded to know what their business was here. James explained how he and Ferb were at Hub 42 when some of Hell's soldiers attacked the settlement. They wanted to know why, but he didn't get an answer, mainly because nobody had one. They had no choice but to wait away from the building to see if anything exciting would happen. Night fell, and the Britannia remnants arrived in large vehicles, with more soldiers outnumbering the demonic army 3-1. James shot up and raced over to one of the remnants in an attempt to execute his plan of bartering with both factions. Just like the demonic army did, a remnant dismissed James and shoved him aside. James slowly walked back to Ferb, who was lying on the floor writing in his notebook again. This time he saw James coming over and threw it on the floor and lay on top of it, hoping James wouldn't see. As to be expected, the remnants and the demonic army started yelling at each other almost immediately after the faction leaders made their way inside. Time ticked by, and there were gunshots from the top of the building. There was silence for a few moments. Soldiers from both sides rushed to the building when suddenly Lucius smashed through the east wall of the top floor and landed with a loud, long thud. Voices could be heard from the top floor saying that Victoria, Lucius's wife, and Field Marshal Bradford were both killed. Queen Cabot III managed to survive whatever the hell happened up there, and was escorted down to the convoy. Shots were being fired from both sides. This seemed like the beginning of the war that people hoped would never happen. James and Ferb dashed towards the south past the gates to a safe area. In the rush, Ferb's notebook was left on the floor, but he knew he couldn't grab it. Ferb said to James he wanted to sneak back in and grab his notebook, and when he did, James snatched it out of his hand. There was a quick struggle between the two, but James took one glance at the notebook and threw it at Ferb. He was not happy. This is what it said. Detonate the nukes underneath Cabot Kingdom to eliminate the remnants. Overheat and blow up Hell's super reactor to destroy Hell and the demonic army. Cabot Kingdom has 2 nukes. One of them was to be fired at Hell, whilst the second one was detonated in its silo, destroying both settlements at the same time. Ferb was on his own. James's plan for peace was over before it began. Hub 42 wouldn't take Ferb back now, especially since James beat him there, and most likely told them of Ferb's plans. Something had to be done, and fast. Ferb looked at his notepad and saw the 3 options. Option A, eliminate Cabot's Kingdom. If he were to convince Queen Cabot III and the remnants that Lucius and the entire demonic army were going to charge Cabot Kingdom in one last assault, this could be the best chance Ferb will have in an attempt to wiping out all of the corrupt and evil remnants. But would that be the best option? The remnants were not a kind bunch. They help themselves to everything and expect something from nothing. Past leaders have made better relationships with other wasteland settlements, but that was then, and this is now. Queen Cabot III was most definitely the cruelest of her line, and encouraged war against Lucius. Her only hope for peace was Field Marshal Bradford, but he's no longer here. It could only take a few of her most trusted guards to sway her into launching those nukes they have tucked underneath their kingdom. The people must go. But with the kingdom itself? Cabot's Kingdom was an incredibly huge and successful trading hub with hundreds of people there. And I mean people were there all day, all night. It was constantly busy. If the kingdom went, farmers, miners, traders, families with innocent people would all die. Was that a price worth paying? Seeing a wasteland go without many of its resources just to stop a bunch of stuck-up egotistical people? Ultimately, if the remnants were killed in Cabot's Kingdom, then thousands of people will die. Lots of valuable goods, including food, water, and technology, will be lost. Lucius and his empire will most likely take over, and seeing as he wants to claim the Britannia wasteland for his own, is that what Ferb wants? Option B, eliminate Hell. Members of the demonic army attacked Ferb's home, Hub 42. If he were to take out Lucius, then he could maybe, just maybe, use that attack as a bartering tool of sorts. If Lucius could get his demonic army together to defend Hell, then he can use his vast amount of technology against them. They were all connected to a giant reactor powering the whole operation. Overheating it will lead it to exploding, wiping out everyone in the factory. but what would be gained, and what would be lost? Lucius was never known to be a nice person, but was willing to listen. He carried an intimidating presence that everyone knew about. Even amongst his army, the demonic army, felt a shiver when he marched by. Lucius himself may not be missed, but nearly 200 people taking up arms there might. Some just follow orders, and some didn't want to be there but just couldn't leave. The other few hundreds working on the factory floor would be missed. They're making great products for the wasteland to use. Some see it as slavery, but others have joined up voluntarily, so it does sound good. At the end of the day, they have families too. Hell's factory itself was too precious to lose. It was the best source of metalwork left in the Britannia wasteland. Weapons, armor, and power armor were a negative focus, but things like the railroad tracks being restored, electronics, so many good things were coming out of there too. The other side of the factory floor was the trading center, with all the goods fresh from the factory itself. If there was one place that had to stay, it was this place. It just needs a new name. Both factions had to either change or be destroyed, but the homes had to stay. If there could be a way of achieving that, how could it be done? Option C. Wipe out both factions. Both factions were not innocent in any way, but neither could stay to rule the Britannia wasteland. The war for the Britannia wasteland was coming, but how could it end in the best way possible? Between Hell and Cabot Kingdom, there were a few small settlements, but it was a true wasteland out there, and people will definitely suffer if the remnant and the demonic army collided. Despite the potential loss of innocent lives, this could be the best way to eliminate them both. Getting to the nukes in Cabot Kingdom really wasn't that difficult for outsiders. There's a network of tunnels underneath Cabot Kingdom used by the remnants to escape at any given scenario. People could use those tunnels to get in, and if you chose the right path, you could find yourself in a nuclear bunker. The remnants were selfish, not smart. People had attempted to hack into the controls in the past, and only one person was successful. Ferb was able to find a copy of the notes in order to do so, and was ready for the job if need be. But how could they be used? If there was a way of getting both armies out of their bases into this no man's land, then the nukes can be launched into the battlefield. This was going to be difficult and dangerous. The nukes alone would cause more fallouts, preventing caravan trading routes and people settling back into the wasteland. But this could be the quickest and potentially most effective way of wiping out both superpowers at the same time. This could lead to an independent wasteland too. Is that any better? If both major factions were destroyed, then it would lead to people in the Britannia wasteland to fend for themselves. Trading couldn't be managed, the metal factory would have to shut down, raiders would more or less become the leading militia of the wasteland, and the quality of life would decrease as a whole. So whilst killing obviously isn't good, is that the best solution? Option D. Peace? The two leaders had to go. They are not good people, and they do not deserve to stay in charge any longer. The bases need to stay. That was set. The people of the Britannia wasteland must also be spared. Not all people of the factions need to die. In getting both factions to no man's land, the soldiers that will follow will be the ones who aim for the same selfish goals as their leader wants. Ideally, this should hopefully keep the best people who actively want peace for all in their respective bases. It should also mean it keeps production active in the metalworks factory, and the trading centre of Cabot Kingdom stays alive. The only problem with this is how do we know that the people who are staying are the better people of their factions? It was an absolute mess, but Ferb had a plan. It might not work, but something was better than nothing. Time to go home. Back to Hub 42. The end game. Ferb raced back to Hub 42 and was ready to act. He arrived at the front entrance with the guards making confused faces. They expected Ferb to be dead. The Galaxy Mother came to the front to greet her own son. She was also annoyed with what he had caused. Hub 42 was a target to whoever wins the war between the Britannia remnants and the demonic army, due to its advanced technologies and the stretch of territory they would claim. Verb explained his plan to use the terminal systems in Hub 42 to get into contact with the remnants and the demonic army. He would try to bring them to the center of the wasteland by claiming their enemy has made movements against each other. Verb logged into the terminal and raised a satellite to get in touch with both factions. He was in. Screens were fuzzing and making static noises. Then they came back to life with 42 on the screens. Verb spoke. To the Britannia remnants and the army from hell, your enemy is moving against you. They have left to attack you already and will take the center of the wasteland. Take your strongest warriors and seize your enemy. If you do not want to see any more violence, then stay at your home. Keep your dynasty alive. Be smart about this. The wasteland is your reward. The screens cut to black, then glitched back to life. Lucius kept 20 soldiers at the factory as well as all of his workers. He took his demonic army and dressed them in heavy armor. Lucius even gave his favorite warrior specialist Mark 7 power armor, the upgraded variant to the Mark 4 power armor. The remnants kept 30 soldiers scattered across Cabot Kingdom, including the nuclear bunker. They knew to protect the bunker and the market. Those who went to battle took their armored vehicles, which was a great advantage, but they only wore thin clothing. No armor whatsoever. This was part of their ignorant ways of thinking they were immune to all damage. Verb had to wait. He couldn't get into the nuclear bunker too early, otherwise it could accelerate the chaos. He had to wait for them to meet up in the middle, and it took up to 2 days. The Galaxy Mother asked Verb about his backup plan. James arrived to tell the Galaxy Mother for him. James explained how he could detonate the nukes in their silo at Cabot Kingdom, wiping them out instantly. He could also overheat Hell's reactor, causing the same devastation. James and the Galaxy Mother were not happy, but James was willing to aid Verb in launching the nukes at both armies in No Man's Land to take out the worst in both factions. Not ideal, but something had to be done. The days went by and the news broke out of both factions engaging in war. The battle was spectacular. The remnants used their armored vehicles as shields and launched grenades from the roofs. Lucius and his warrior in power armor charged forward, smashing the skulls of the redcoats in hiding. It was large and loud. Verb was ready. He was hacking into the nuclear bunker with James checking for security details. It was going well until James found a firewall he couldn't get past. Over in the bunker, the scientists working the nukes saw warnings on every screen. They jumped into action and attempted to use them against the demonic army. Verb was in full control of one of the 2 nukes. He could aim and launch if he wanted to. The second was proving to be a struggle, as the scientists at Cabot Kingdom were trying to retake control. After control of the second nuke changed multiple times, the scientists had enough and launched it. James and Verb were panicking. Both nukes were launching, but the door to the second silo remained closed. Seconds later, the first nuke launched, soaring through the sky and arched towards the center of the wasteland. The second nuke launched, hit the roof of the silo. An explosion was heard all across the wasteland, soon followed by a bright mushroom cloud. James and Verb looked at each other, then looked at the nuke charging towards the 2 factions raging on at each other. Hundreds of soldiers, people, only had a moment to realize they were doomed. So much happened at once. In the days that followed the battle for the Britannia wasteland, people got used to the fallout created by the nukes in the end of the battle. Another part of the wasteland was closed off to the survivors. The Britannia remnants were formed after the Britannia military before the war. They had selfish intentions, but the battle for the Britannia wasteland forced them to disband. Everyone who stayed at Cabot Kingdom died in the blast caused by the nuke that failed to launch. The bunker that sat beneath Cabot Kingdom collapsed and nothing could be salvaged. The vast market that made the place popular was disintegrated, along with all of the food, water, medicines, tools, and everything else. The market became a graveyard, and the bodies were those of the last ever visitors. So much gone. Hell was many things, an army camp, a factory, a trading center, a slave pen, and much more. Everyone gave the place with everything under one roof a unique name. Some call it Redemption City, others call it home. The soldiers who stayed behind that day all retired from the demonic army, and that army was officially dead that day. They helped others whenever they could, in any way they could. They can't allow past misdeeds to be repeated. The metal factory thrived, with more workers taking shifts, allowing people to make more products when they wanted, and reduced weapons and armor manufacturing by at least 90%. Things became more peaceful, and a community was formed around that. It was a place to be. Home. New London stayed the same. The Peace Building was repaired, and it was used in the same way as it was before. People visited for trade negotiations, and it soon became what Cabot Kingdom once was. The traps by the entrance were disarmed and removed, allowing more people to come and go. A marketplace was formed. A group of people started a farm, and more life was given another chance to live in New London. As time ticked over to the 24th century, Candy finally moved house. The Supernatural Museum of Superpowers was no longer the home to anyone. Candy and her parents moved to the nearby settlement, expected to be shut out again, but after running away so many times, the settlers took her in. A child-glowing one was manageable, but they weren't too sure about having two feral ghouls. Candy solved that problem by shooting them both in the head. Candy's childhood was taken, and she finally took it back. Days felt like decades. Now Candy had somebody to talk to, somebody to play with. Her life was back. Hub 42 saw the battle for the Britannia wasteland as a wake-up call. They could not be selfish and keep their incredibly advanced technologies to themselves. They were hesitant to do so, but they sent out members with those technologies to other settlements. They provided cooked food, lighting, electricity, and a lot more. The Galaxy Mother got in touch with Hell's metal factory and helped them produce the technology they had. It was a sign of good things to come, as Wastelanders enjoyed more luxuries again. As for James and Ferb, they stayed at Hub 42. This was their home before the battle, and it stayed as their home after the battle. They continued to learn more secrets about the universe since they were brought up by alien worshippers. They got really interesting on March 17th, 2300. They had a very special visitor from space. The Britannia Isles was a wasteland before the bombs dropped. Corruption running wild, people growing selfish, and violence only increasing. The bombs acted as a reset button for some parts of the world, but for the Britannia Isles, all it did was encourage the bad behavior. It took centuries for their villainous ways to be cured, but one thing was always set in stone. It's that war. War never changes.